is a very important language skill because it provides input for the learner and it helps to improve overall communication. Some theories mention about the importance of listening skill. For example,
Kathleen Galvin exposed 5 reasons for listening and mentioned that the reasons our students have for listening will generally fall under one or other of these categories. Number 1, to engage in social rituals. Number 2, to exchange information. Number 3, to exert control. Number 4, to share feelings. And number 5, to enjoy yourself. McDonough and Shaw deepen on listening skill in classroom, mentioning the following. There is a great range and variety of input. In some situations, we are listeners only. In others, our listening skills form just a part of a whole interaction, and an ability to respond appropriately is equally important. We listen for different purposes: to get information, to socialize, and or to be entertained. So, the degree of attention and possibly the strategies used will differ. Related to this is whether we are listening in a face-to-face exchange or through another medium, such as the radio. In some cases, there may be interference or background noise that may affect our ability to process what is being said. The people involved, how many, their roles, and our relationship with them. In many situations, there is a visual element, for example, television, which gives important clues beyond the words actually used. Reading and listening have some similarities. According with Michael Ross, the notion of listening is often paralleled to reading, in which there are texts with which readers interact.
reading, which was traditionally seen as a passive skill, the skill of listening is now regarded as active, so that like the reader, the listener is constantly involved in guessing, anticipating, checking, interpreting, interacting, and organizing. The differences have been seen between listening and reading as a process, in which listener's task is a relatively transient one, since what has been heard cannot usually be recaptured once it has passed, whereas the reader has the opportunity to refer back and check comprehension. Therefore, the listener's role changes from situation to situation, so that at certain times they will be listeners only, and at others the skill of listening will form just a part of a whole interaction.
The reception and interpretation of speech forms are the first 2 parts of a 3-level hierarchy in the listening process. The first 2 levels are essential components since they're always in evidence, and the final level, the response, is not necessarily an integral part of the process, although in a typical situation, the listener may be required or at least have the opportunity to respond to what is said.
Reminding about a without some distinction between genuineness and authenticity, he describes the former as a characteristic of the text and an absolute equality, and the characteristic of the relationship between the text and the reader, in this case, the listener, and has to do with the appropriate or authentic response. Pre-recorded text and audiovisual materials of native speakers' conversations may be genuine examples of real English, but they do not necessarily lead to authenticity of purpose for the learner.
Penny Orr highlights in what she calls real-life listening, where listening exercises are judged as valuable to the extent that they simulate the real-life listening conditions, or describes the preconditions for real-life listening as follows. Real-life listening allows access to environmental cues. Listening requires some show of reciprocity and typically requires frequent listener response.
Hi, this is Rose and I'm showing you up my listening lesson plan. As you can see on your screen, This is directed to 5th graders, and the elements that appear here are usually on my curricular learning environment, familiar and community, communicative activity, identify places and directions, social practice of the language, list information about places that include given directions, and the achievements. The objective of this lesson is that my students be able to identify points of reference, for example, forward, left, back, right, across, along, blocks, etc. Identify when hearing it the name of a place one intends to visit. Identify words that indicate a distance to be covered in order to reach a point. And as vocabulary have these words, as you can see, they are places. And before to go on my development, let me explain you this vocabulary, like the points of reference and the places, was previously seen. And I use this poster. I scan my poster, and through the drawings, my students identify the places in a city. For example, the parking lot, the gas station, the drugstore, the supermarket, the bank, etc. as the points of reference. For example, the blocks, forward, left, right, across, etc. Okay, so going back to my lesson plan, I have the word map, that is a matching game. Have students choosing an item at random and then should relate the item with the correct place. Okay, I have different items here. Different. They are going to choose an item. For example, this, for example, a liter of milk, and they are going to relate with the correct place. For example, they are going to relate with, for example, with groceries. And if they choose this, for example, they are going to relate with this, for example. Sorry for my flashcards, but I use them a lot. And the second point says, have students open their book on page 69, then point out the symbols on the right. Elicit responses, what places they belong to. Okay, my students use this book. Okay? Okay. I scan the page. Here you have. Okay, I'm going to point out the symbols on the right, and my students are going to make predictions as Underwood proposing the ontology. The pre-listening activity is that the students make predictions. In this case, for example, my students are going to tell me, for example, the pea belongs to the parking lot, this piece of meat belongs to the butcher, and the coffee, and so on. Okay? All right. So, going back to the lesson plan, the next point says, explain. They are going to hear about where they are going to draw those symbols on the map. Okay, as the ontology mentioned, penny or, the students are going to be exposed to a real English. It's not the same when the teacher introduced this vocabulary. So they are going to hear an audio and they are going to identify those symbols and draw it on the map. Okay, here in the while listening says, play the audio and make pause at the end of each sentence in order to students identify the places and where they are going to locate them. Okay, here I suggest to make pause because, as the ontology mentioned, once audio finish, it is impossible that the listener catch what is the word they listen. It's not the same with the reader. The reader has the opportunity to going back and make a comprehension about what is read. Here, the listener, it is necessary, in this case, as my suggestion, make passes. And here, I have the audio. Let me try if I can make pass. Okay, here.
Track 40. There's a bus stop in front of the supermarket and a large parking lot next to the supermarket on the right.
All right. Here is the first part. They are listening about the parking lot. So they identify the symbol and so they through the directions. For example, next to the supermarket, so they are going to locate according what they hear. All right, so but it's necessary to make pauses. Okay, going back to my list, lesson. Says, read to your students the statements and have the students circle true or false. As we also mentioned, genuineness and authenticity. The students make authentic responses. So here in the exercise, here in the exercise, we have some statements. I'm going to read these statements. The supermarkets on Park Lane. So they are going to identify if it's true or if it's false. All right, so going back to my lesson, the next activity says have students focus on the next activity on page 70 and point them out. They are going to listen the conversation and circle the correct options. So as Penny proposes, this is a post listening activity because my students are going to make a completion of this exercise. So they are going to circle the correct option. So in this way, they are going to complete the whole statement. And once again, I propose to play the audio once or twice if it's needed. This is in order to my student have the opportunity to understand what is the word that they are hearing. And finally, have the students in per word to check responses. So they are going to interchange the responses, and that's all. I hope you like it. Thank you.